Welcome to Sivako, the road to Avatar. My name is Shaun Alexander, and I will be your guide through the world of Avatar and beyond. And today, I have a very special guest. You could even say an expert in the field, in a way. So, special guest, would you like to introduce yourself?
Shaun Oel Ngati Kamai, which, as we all know, translates as I see you. Hello, Shaun. My name is Dr. Vincent M. Gaine. I am an academic, a film critic, and and journalist, and I am a podcaster, and I am very happy to be here today, joining you from the podcast Invasion of the Poddy People, and from my own Pandoran halls of academia.
Beautifully put, beautifully put. And I was very excited to have you on here because I could tell that you have a wealth of knowledge that is going to be incredibly important for us as we continue our journey through Avatar and the world of Pandora itself.
Agreed. And I'm very, very excited to be here. As soon as I saw that there's a podcast about Avatar, I wonder if there'd be space for me on it. And, well, what do you know? Here I am.
So, to begin with, I do have a couple questions, and I'm sure you're going to have some good answers for these. The first of which is, when did you first see Avatar?
18th December 2009. I looked that up. Don't worry, I don't just have that date embedded in my consciousness. It's got to thank Facebook memories for that. So I
I was
saw
going to say it was
Avatar.
very assured otherwise.
Yeah. Don't worry, I looked it up. I saw Avatar in its opening week, and I saw it at the London IMAX, so the biggest screen in Britain. The absolute perfect viewing conditions for that film. Although I must say there was something distinctly imperfect about that because partway through the film there was a power cut, so kind of got interrupted. Um, Not only that, one of the people I was there with actually had food poisoning at the time, and all of the 3D and shaky cam made them feel, well, not just feel, but actually be quite sick. So there were a few downers, but despite all of that, it was an absolutely fantastic viewing experience. I came out of that cinema and felt that it had been truly transcendent. Um, and that's a feeling that has continued. I've watched Avatar several times since then. I saw it a couple of times on its original theatrical release. After that, in regular cinemas, still in 3D though. And then when it had a re-release in later in 2010 with some additional footage, I saw it then as well, and I've watched it at home on Blu-ray and DVD a couple of times, and most recently, just last night, watching it on a laptop. And you know what? Even on a small laptop screen, it still works pretty damn well.
I feel like your viewing experience for the first time is possibly the best I've heard so far in terms of you got IMAX 3D and also a very memorable experience at that as well.
Yeah, there were some
So,
unfortunate associations with it, but at least, but I will say the overall experience was still positive.
yeah. So is there still a favorite moment for you that always stands out?
Oh, you wanting just one?
You can do two
Well,
if you
yeah,
like.
okay. Yeah, okay. I'll give two. The two moments of Avatar that I find the most exhilarating. Interestingly, and they actually form a nice kind of mirroring of each other. The first is when our hero Jake Sully first awakens, as it were, in his avatar body, and we get a point of view shot as he opens his eyes for the first time in his new body, and then he gets up and he moves around, and then he goes outside, and the thrill, the rush. As he experiences his new body, he experiences this new environment, is for me a demonstration of what cinema does at its absolute best, which is where it pulls you, the viewer, into the experience of the film itself. And when Jake is running to go a bit Kate Bush here, when he's running up that hill, it feels like I'm there as part of it. And the other moment is kind of a nice a companion piece, which is the very final moments of the film when Jake is passing through the eye of Awa, as it's described, to go to permanently leave his human body and go into his Navi body. And then the final shot, which is the eyes opening and looking directly out at the audience. And I think that final look, it says so many things. It's saying to the audience, I see you. It's inviting us want to be fully part of that world, as the film has been throughout, but then also saying, take this world with you. I think it's a key part of the film's environmental message. And it's that point where those eyes open. I always feel enervated and elevated by that, and just goes as, and then beautifully goes into the film's title comes up, Avatar, and gets me every time.
Followed by a beautiful Leona Lewis track as well, which
This is true.
always kind of takes me by surprise.
Walking through a dream, I see you.
But I think you're right. That final shot is absolutely fantastic, and it also kind of works as a great moment in terms of it. I feel like that's one of the moments that's always embedded in my mind is those eyes opening, and I think maybe because the posters rely on that image so strongly as well.
Indeed, yeah. The principal poster for Avatar was simply that face, and it's an interesting thing to say about the film's marketing, because it was largely marketed on, this is a James Cameron film, which we hadn't seen one for quite a while at that point, while also emphasizing this is something that looks unusual. We've got this strange kind of cat-like, monkeyish face that is also blue, and this is Avatar. It actually doesn't tell us very much. The trailer, the marketing for the original film, told us a bit more, showed us what we were going for. But it is notable that, as you say, it used a great deal of faces and eyes to sell itself.
And that leads me very nicely on to my final question for you, which is, how are you feeling in terms of excitement for The Way of Water?
Well, a couple of weeks back, you spoke to Russell from the Not Just for Kids podcast, who mentioned in
Yes,
that.
lovely chat with him.
Yeah, indeed. Well, Russell and I are both part of the podcast Invasion of the Poddy People, along with our fellow poddy person, James. And back in December, we did our review of the year, and we all looked forward to say, well, what are the films of 2022 we were most looking forward to? James went for Across the Spider-Verse, which sadly we've got to wait for. Russell went for the Batman, and I went for Avatar, at the time, Avatar 2, before we knew it would be called The Way of Water. So I was excited for that film, to know that that film was coming, because I have been waiting for this movie. By the time it arrives, I will have been waiting for it for 13 years. I watch a lot of movies and I love a lot of movies, and many films take me to places where I love to be, and I am always thrilled to go with them. I'm happy to go into Gotham. I'm happy to go into the multiverse of madness, and I'm happy to experience everything everywhere all at once. But if there is one cinematic place I want to go more than any other, it is Pandora. So when the trailer dropped, I mean, it was mostly a matter of, I looked at what we were there and saying, okay, yep, I'm liking this. And here we have the water, the main thing that was absent, I suppose, in the first film. And I understand that's one of the reasons it's taken so long for the sequel to come along, because the technology had to be developed to the point of being able to capture performance, to do performance capture underwater. But I've waited long enough. Of course, I've still got to wait another 7 months before the actual movie arrives. But Oh, I am so ready for it, and I will get more ready as the time progresses. And I can just imagine when I actually go in December, when I go into the cinema to see Avatar: The Way of Water. Yeah, I'm probably building it up too much in my mind, and it's going, and I'm going to think this is good. This is it. I've been waiting for this, and maybe it won't live up to expectations, and I'll at the end of it go either, yeah, it was fine, but I hope not. I hope I come out of that and going like, oh yes, that was what I wanted. So I suppose you could say I'm somewhat excited.
Yeah, I just a touch.
Did that come
It's
across? I mean, I don't want to
just
be
a.
vague.
And you know what? It's so fantastic to hear the excitement from everyone. And so far, everyone I've talked to has been excited, and I think that is something that you know, for the most part, I think that is a James Cameron goodwill thing. In that
May I
everyone has
ask?
a yeah, of course.
Um, I don't imagine you're likely to get many people interested in appearing on this podcast who are not fans. But would you? But I can imagine it would be very interesting to talk to somebody who hates Avatar and wishes there was no sequel coming. I imagine that could be a really interesting discussion because I expect you've encountered plenty of negativity towards the film. I certainly have.
Oh yeah, definitely. There's definitely a whole community of people who are, in a way, anti-Avatar, which is a bit crazy to me. I feel like Avatar is one of those films. It does no damage to you. It doesn't hurt you if you just ignore it if you don't like it.
Precisely.
But I've actually really thought about that and thinking, you know what, it'd be really good to have someone on who can't stand Avatar and has no interest in seeing the new one. And I was also thinking, you know what, because they're doing the re-release in September, would be a great chance to find someone who hasn't seen Avatar and get them to see it fresh at the cinema in September and see what their thought of it was coming into it without the knowledge of it. Maybe just
Totally.
from what they've heard of other people saying about it.
Yeah, that would be fascinating. Let me know how that works out.
Fingers crossed. We'll see if we can get someone around that time. If anyone is listening and they know someone who hasn't seen Avatar, which is, you know, I feel like it's quite unlikely. Certainly from certain age group, I feel like there's a certain age group who have all seen Avatar at this point.
Well, then in that case,
Um,
maybe somebody from a younger age group, people who were, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 when the first one came out, and would now be in their late teens, in their early 20s. That's possible.
I'm going to put a call out for it. I think that's going to be a good one to see if we can get someone in for that.
You're welcome.
So, so that brings us perfectly on to what we want to talk about today, and that topic is we're going to talk about gender and its relationship to not only Avatar but to James Cameron and his filmography.
Indeed.
Now, you came to me with this idea. You really seemed very passionate about it. I'm really looking forward to sort of what you've got to share on the topic.
Well, delighted on that. My own, although I do feel I must apologise that here we are, two men talking about gender, and we will be talking about representations of the female form and of femininity, and the role and the role of the female gender in cinema. So I hope that you can maybe find a sort of a female voice, or perhaps even a non-binary voice, in a future episode who'd be able to offer a further perspective, because I've got my perspectives, but full transparency, these are the perspectives of a middle-aged, white, um, heterosexual, cis male. So I'm extremely mainstream, and I'm the sort of person who talks far too much. We've all heard plenty of white male patriarchy talking, but well, here we are, bunch of guys talking about movies. I hope that there will be some alternative voices later on in this podcast series. What I want to start off by saying about gender is there is one phrase we must not use. I expect, Shaun, you've come across the term strong female character once or twice.
Just a couple times actually,
Okay,
and also very in relation to Cameron's characters.
indeed. Well, we're not going to use that phrase anymore today because the phrase strong female character is bullshit. Okay. It is a really lazy, reductive, and frankly, kind of sexist term. And the reason I say that is we don't identify male characters in that way. We won't say, here's a strong male character, as if this is something that's to remark upon. So, in doing so, this is that particular term is effectively a way of um, almost masculinizing the female character, I think, because what does strong even mean? Does it mean they're strong willed? Does it mean they're strong bodied? Does it mean they are strongly written into the narrative? There's a lot to them, they're rounded. It's too vague, it doesn't help us, and it's got a lot of problems. So, if we're going to talk about the type of female characters who are abundant, I think, in the work of James Cameron, and of course beyond, I think a better measure, a better way of thinking about them is in terms of agency. If we take a character within a film, is this a character who determines their own narrative, who has agency? Now, I think it's fair to say that historically, women in film have often lacked agency. You could pick a number of films from any decade, any period of cinema, certainly American cinema, but beyond as well. And they would largely be passive, they would be defined in relation to the male character, typically as the object of romance, object of desire, um, sometimes something more than that, but typically not with much control over their own narrative. Now, there are some notable exceptions. Just to pick three quite different ones. Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, which certainly has some agency. Jill McBain in Once Upon a Time in the West, and Brie Daniels in Clute would be three, just fairly random examples from different decades. But I want to focus particularly on a movement in cinema that began in the 1970s, because in the 1970s we see the rise of the slasher film and the appearance of the final girl trope. Some of you may be thinking, where's he going with this? Well, don't worry, I'm going to explain. Hopefully, most people listening are familiar with slasher films and that they often feature a final girl, as in you've got various victims get offed, but in the end, there's a final girl who faces the killer. Now, some prominent examples from the 1970s would be Black Christmas, Halloween, and Alien, in which, and all of these feature characters being picked off, and then we're left with a final girl. And I think this subgenre is highly influential on the work of James Cameron. Now, it's worth noting that Cameron first came into filmmaking in the 1970s as part of the Roger Corman School of Filmmaking, where cheap exploitation films and people like Cameron, also people like Martin Scorsese and John Carpenter, got some of their early breaks working on Roger Corman films. So Cameron was working in this era of low-budget exploitation films, which would often, which developed particular aspects that, understandably, would then influence his own work. Now, obviously, I mentioned Alien. We've got the influence upon Aliens and the continuation of the character of Ripley. You may not immediately think of Alien as a slasher film, but it does follow that pattern. And we do have Ripley as our final girl, and then obviously that feeds into Aliens. But there's also, I think, a very clear parallel to be drawn between Halloween and the Terminator. Both are low budget, both feature singular voice auteurs who were also multitaskers. Cameron actually worked on John Carpenter's Escape from New York, so there's a connection there. Both films involve relentless and seemingly unstoppable killers pursuing women. And just as Laurie Strode tackles Michael Myers with all manner of weapons, so does Sarah Connor best the Terminator in their final showdown. Now, Aliens expands on everything that came before. This time it's war. And we see in that Ripley is more capable and adaptable than the Marines. And Cameron continued with these prominent female protagonists with Lindsay in The Abyss, more of Sarah Connor in Terminator 2, Helen Tasker in True Lies. Oh, look, Jamie Lee Curtis. Hello, Halloween, you see. Rose in Titanic, and now with our current topic, Natiri in Avatar. So I think the crucial thing to say about this is there is a great deal of female agency, even though it may not be apparent from the start. After all, Sarah Connor starts off largely being literally chased and rescued by the men in the film, whether it's the Terminator chasing her or Michael Bihn's Kyle Reese saving her. But it is notable that come the end of the film, she is the only one with agency. We're aware that the nuclear war is coming, but there she is, you know, doing things her way now. She is driving south with now John Connor growing inside her. Off she goes. That is the agency that this character has. Similarly, in Aliens, we see that initially Ripley does not want to join the mission to go back to the planet LV-426, and then you could say, well, does she show much agency by just agreeing to go with the Marines and the company expedition? Maybe, maybe not. But certainly once she's there, we see her agency steadily take over. It's particularly notable, I think, when the Bishop pilots the dropship in and Ripley drags out the wounded Hicks, and and the interchange goes, "How much time? Plenty. We're not leaving. We're not." Ripley's definitely in command there, and that I think is important. That she is somebody taking command of the narrative, and much the same happens in Terminator 2, where Sarah Connor is now doing things her way. Yes, she's literally contained by the mental institution that we first encounter her in, but she very quickly, upon escaping from there, takes charge, and it's her mission that is ongoing. So that's what I think is an important aspect of looking at female agency across Cameron's films. And in the case of Titanic, it's entirely her story. That's we start off with the character of Rose, who is about to be shackled into into a marriage with, let's face it, a pretty awful person. But the story of that goes that it's about her taking her own agency, and indeed we can be sure that it carried on after the sinking of the Titanic and carried on through her whole life. In the case of Natiri in Avatar, to an extent, she is somewhat, ordered around by her parents within the Omatakaya people. And there's a point when, in the final climactic sequence of Avatar, Jake is saying to her, "Pull back, don't engage. That's an order." Although notably, she doesn't follow those instructions. And it is important, I think, the role that Natiri takes throughout the film in terms of guiding Jake and encouraging him. We'll come back to this, helping him to understand where he is, and then in the final clash of the film, we've got that what Natiri does proves she is doing things her way, both in terms of the action side of things, but also the key point is the emotional and compassionate side of her. Once Jake has almost died because of breathing in Pandora's atmosphere, Natiri finds Jake for the first time in his human body, but she looks at him with the same love that she did of his avatar body. And I think that's an important point to note, that she is somebody who is knowing her full heart, as it were, and following that. And I think that demonstrates agency as well.
Definitely. And you know what? Let's keep talking about Natiri, because I think you make a really good point about the first time that she finds Jake in his human body, and it is such a beautiful moment because at the start there was a sense of hatred, but to the humans, they are the outsiders, they're the invaders, and to see her see past that the motto of seeing, obviously, and see Jake for who he is, despite his body, is a very like important and it's a very emotional moment I find in that film.
Yeah, absolutely. When we've got and she's holding um, his body that is weak and um, I don't want to use the word crippled because that's obviously got problems, but his unable body, should we say, for all sorts of reasons. But nonetheless, it's she still refers to him as my Jake, and it is, and I love the one of the best indications I think of the extraordinary visual effects in this is when we've got her looking down at him and we see his actual sort of physical hand on her face, much smaller, but there is so much emotion, so much joy and fear and relief and love in that face, even though it's this huge sort of monkey cat blend, which is bright blue. It still feels so engaging in that, and it looks more like makeup than anything else. If there had been like behind the scenes footage of Zoe Saldana in makeup rather than in the performance capture, it wouldn't have surprised me. But no, that's all. Those are effects. Thing worth noting actually is that visual effects often date. Digital effects can date fairly quickly. But watching Avatar again yesterday, I didn't think they had. It still looks just as impressive.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think it's one of the ones I consider it that, and I feel like the Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest are two of my examples I always go to when I think of visual effects that always still stand up. And but in particular for Pirates, it's the Davy Jones. It still to me looks flawless, and
Mm,
Avatar stands up just as well as that. In that I watch it and the environments I'm looking at and the characters look so realistic, but also have so much texture and fit so well within the world. You can see that everything has been thought of, and it doesn't feel rushed. And that's something I like about Cameron. Well, he doesn't rush anything really. You can tell. You can tell
well,
by
that's for sure.
the 13-year gap we're currently experiencing. And I imagine, with Way of Water, we're about to experience again another step forward. I don't know how you step further than Avatar did, but we're about to see it, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how he's pushed those visual effects further to make it even more engaging.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, it's always a tricky thing, I think, when talking about auteur figures, because on the one hand, it's totally unrealistic. Films are not made by individuals; they are made by um, dozens, hundreds, in something in the case of a film this scale, thousands of people. But yeah, at the same time, we're aware that there's kind of an overarching, or perhaps a central creative vision and um, you know and determination that's forcing all these things to happen, and that they're all being cohered in relation to something in particular. But it is important, I think, to to note upon the others involved. Like in your first episode, for instance, you talked about the importance of Weta, the digital effects house, and effects house in general, and the work that they did. And I believe that they've worked on The Way of Water as well. And so it's worth and so be yeah, but absolutely, whomever we credit for it, it's going to be really interesting to see where we've taken these. And the trailer for The Way of Water has shown some of the new designs and shown the Navi swimming, and I'm like, okay, that looks amazing.
Yeah, I think the underwater that we we have coming up is something that I'm most interested in because it does look like something I haven't seen before. Our best example of a film that's been shot on with the intention of looking underwater is Aquaman, and obviously that's taken a very stylistic approach in terms of what they were trying to achieve. I'm not sure if I fully think it works all the time. I think it looks a little bit dull, and I'm a big James Wan fan. I think he's incredible, but the Aquaman doesn't inspire me like Avatar has in terms of what the underwater visuals look like.
Yeah, that's a good comparison, I think, because no, I wasn't overly impressed with Aquaman either. I feel that the opportunities for underwater um, events and underwater action were not really explored in Aquaman in such a way as I hope they will be in the way of water. And if you want to see really dramatic stuff happening underwater, then probably your best bet is to watch, Finding Nemo and Finding Dory.
Yeah, you know what? Those are probably the best examples for anything where you want to see the way action can be shot underwater. Those films do include some pretty impressive, not very high stakes action, but they are impressive um, scenes of danger, of risk. And yeah, I can't ever complain about Finding Nemo or Dory. I'll be honest; they are very
Indeed.
enjoyable.
Yeah.
Uh, so I want to actually cut back to Neytiri a bit, and I want to talk about the first moment that we kind of see her on screen, and I find
Okay.
that's a really impressive moment in that she's first introduced to us as like look spying over Jake Sully as he's like walking through the forest,
Yep.
and then straight away she is bow ready to attack. He is clearly trespassing. He's not in an area, a place he should be, and she sees him as a threat. But then it's the connection to Iowa, and what? Sorry, you're going to know this, but what's the name of the little light? What are they called? The little
Well, Nateri
fairy-like
refers to them
thing.
as seeds of the forest.
That's it. And that's such a lovely way to describe it, isn't it? Seeds of the forest. And
Mm.
it's when the one drops down onto her arrowhead, and the sort of reaction she has to it is fantastic. I find that such a really interesting moment in terms of her character and her motivations.
Yes. Yeah, because it goes back to the idea of agency. Because on the one hand, it's like, well, we immediately see her agency is to take out this interloper, but then her connection to the wider world in which that she inhabits is something that, I mean, on the one hand, is this compromising her agency? Well, I don't think so. It's more contextualizing it, because what we see throughout is that a key theme of Avatar is connection. And we see here the beginnings of the connection between Jake and Natiri. And it is indeed consistently, if you think about it throughout the film, contextualized within the wider connections of Pandora. So it starts with that seed landing on Natiri's arrowhead. Later on, there's the point when those seeds come all around Jake, and he's like, "What is this?" And she explains, seeds of the forest, very pure spirit. And I always love his reaction. He goes, "Uh huh," because he doesn't know what the fuck's going on, which who would? um, and but then further up, but then as things continue, of course, where when Natiri is introducing Jake to other things that are part of Navi life, like making the bond to Helu, first with their horses, and then with the Ikran, and then crucially, of course, with the trees and with each other. We are. I am with you, Jake. We are mated before Awa. So the sense of connection and how that relates to agency is there, I guess, pretty much the first appearance of Natiri. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that's really important. Is yeah, you're right. The connection and how that flows through out the film, and it's such a interesting way that Cameron has shown throughout the story that her connection to the world around her is her driving force. That is her agency, and that's such an important thing for her. That she's going against in that first moment. She is going against her natural instinct in a way, but trusting in that connection to AOR and the wider world that. that it is important that he is important in some way. And it's a lovely moment. And I also think you're right. The moment where where they're bonding with in front of the tree, and that connection as well. That is another beautiful moment where she is allowing Jake into that connection and how showing him her world in as full a way as well. Obviously, outside of Neytiri, there is another of the Na'vi characters, which is Neytiri's mother, and
Moat.
what? And she's the spiritual leader, and she has quite a important moment within the film, which is when Home Tree has been destroyed. That she's the one to break Jake Sully free,
Yep.
and I feel like that's quite an interesting moment as well because up to that point, she was always skeptical of him, and it's no surprise he is an outsider, and they have bad experience with them. But it's interesting that again, it's about that connection and that trust that they put in AOR and the wide, the wider connection to the world, that they believe that he has some importance. And it's not that he's not a this is the problem. It does come across as white savior in some way, and that's I'm sure that's a discussion for another day. But he isn't the hero. It's his ability to bring others together in a way.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, yeah. I mean, I think the racial politics of Avatar are, yeah, that's another, that's worthy of its a whole wider discussion. But I will just say briefly. I remember one discussion I've had with a friend of mine who doesn't enjoy Avatar at all. She described the Jake as effectively hijacking the mythology of the Na'vi, which I don't think is what we see in the film, because um, hijacking would imply taking that mythology and redirecting it. Whereas what Jake does is he inserts himself into that mythology. Um, Again, crucially, he learns the story of Turuk Maktau from Natiri, and then he takes on the role of Turuk Maktau to bring the clans together in a time of great sorrow. So I think in that respect, um, there's a form of, yeah, this inserting oneself into a mythology and filling the role which which was already prepared, rather than um, taking over. So I think while there are aspects of the white savior in Jake, I think that archetype is being utilized in an interesting way. Um, Now, just talking about this idea of agency more specifically, um, it is worth noting that the prominence of female protagonists in James Cameron's films has led to his work being described as feminist. And I feel that may be overly simplistic, because feminism is about much more than women of agency. I mean, there's so much feminist literature, multiple waves of feminism, there's post feminism, and there have been significant changes in social and cultural attitudes, not to mention legislation. But there are still some very big changes to be made. I mean, obviously, Me Too demonstrated the amount of difficulties women face, as have recent cases of murder and assault. We've still got a long way to go. And if we think about the film industry, I mean, as we know, to date, only 3 women have won the Academy Award for directing. There was a major research project recently called Calling the Shots, which counted and documented women in the British film industry. Um, and that's something we can leave a link to in the show notes, which identifies the minority of women in the film industry. Obviously, we've had the exposure of Harvey Weinstein and Joss Whedon, and then just recently there was a case of Frank Langella being fired from the Netflix project The Fall of the House of Usher because of inappropriate behavior towards a female actor, which broke the instructions of the intimacy coordinator. And I think the fact that there are arguments supporting Langella which claim that he is a victim of cancel culture rather than more outspoken support for the victim, demonstrates that there's an awful lot more work to be done in this area. And because of all of that, I think it is risky and reductive to ascribe specific political agendas and content to films aimed at and consumed by wide audiences. And just as I think Avatar is doing something with the white savior archetype, I think also that these films and all films really add something interesting to the conversation that we can discuss. And what we have here in Avatar and in Cameron's work more widely are female characters, bodies, and identities being worked on and problematized, and male bodies as well.
Yeah, there's a lot to do with bodies in James Cameron's work, and the human form and how they are seen and treated in a way. The way Jake Sully is treated at the beginning of Avatar is a great example of that. In terms
Oh, yeah.
of he's literally thrown into this situation just because he's the twin,
Mm-hmm.
and there's an awful joke at the start, which is I can't remember the exact phrasing, but it's something along the lines of can take it's something to do with standing on his 2 feet or taking his place, and the army guy says it with such an awful
Step
like
into his
sneer.
shoes, so to speak.
That's the phrase, that's it. And it's an straight away you can I can feel the annoyance because I'm like I know people who would make an awful joke. I've met people who'd make an awful joke like that and think it's funny, and it's not a funny joke. um and yeah, I think Cameron does such a good job of speaking on how bodies are seen on screen, and Avatar is a great example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if we can look at female bodies across Cameron's oeuvre, listeners may be familiar with Laura Mulvey's article, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema. And this article argues that the gaze of cinema is inherently male, and therefore the body of the woman is there to be looked at for the voyeuristic pleasure of the male viewer. Now, it's quite easy to find evidence for this. We can look at the ways that women are framed, lit, and presented, and there is a strong sense of the female form, that the female form in cinema is to be looked at. Now, demonstration is it for a particular demonstration, it's far more common to see female nudity than male. And we can use Cameron as an example here, because Titanic famously has Kate Winslet's Rose stripping for a naked picture, draw me like one of your French girls. But we don't see Leonardo DiCaprio naked, except above the chest. We could jump back to the Terminator, and we do see Arnold Schwarzenegger walking around nude, but there's no frontal male nudity. Whereas there is a love scene between Sarah and Kyle that does have female nudity. But I think in the case of Avatar, we're seeing bodies being something different. So the body of Jake, it goes from being weak and damaged to strong and active. And the body of Neytiri is, of course, active throughout. Now, I have read some criticisms that describe Neytiri's body as being presented as some sort of ideal beach babe volleyball player. But you could make a parallel analysis that the body of Jake is like that of a surfer dude or a bodybuilder. Um, both of these bodies, all the bodies really, are being presented as a form of spectacle, which makes perfect sense because Avatar is spectacle upon spectacle within spectacle. We have the spectacle of the bodies within the environment, which is itself the spectacle of the performance capture within the digital effects. Now, one could go down the road of there is maybe a problem of gender binary understandings. These alien creatures have the same understanding of gender as humans, despite having other significant differences. But I think that is a symptom of when the film was made. Conversations about non binary understandings of gender were less prominent 10, 15 years ago. I'm sure they were happening, but since then, these conversations have moved into the mainstream. And it will be interesting to see if there is more gender variety or should I say fluidity, in the way of water. I mean, I'm not expecting it, but who knows?
Yeah, I don't see it being out of the realm of possibility in terms of James Cameron is a very forward. I would say is a forward-thinking filmmaker. I feel like he is very open in terms of learning from his past work as well, and I think maybe that is part to do with his environmental side. He obviously has a love for the world and for the people of the world in a way as well through that, and he does get his way of showing that within Avatar himself. Sigourney Weaver's talked about it, but her character as Dr. Grace Augustine is basically James Cameron in the film. She plays James Cameron, the sort of person coming in and telling the telling the capitalist pigs, "Oh, guys, don't do this. You're ruining the planet," and no one listening to him. And I thought that was that's an interesting way of working again with Sigourney Weaver, who we worked with on Aliens, and bringing her back and having her play him in a way.
That's wow. That's great because that's actually not something I knew. Thank you. You've told me something about Avatar that I wasn't aware of. That the character of Grace Augustine is effectively Cameron's avatar within the movie. That's in which is notable because, of course, that strengthens a wider argument I've read about this, which actually leads me nicely on to my next point, which is to talk about go back to the idea of the gaze of cinema, the look of cinema. So as we mentioned, the idea of the look of cinema being inherently male, and I'd suggest that there is a certain institutional backing to that because what we have is an industry and an entire medium that has, to a large extent, been put together by men and therefore influenced by patriarchal understandings. So I think there is something to be said for the gaze of cinema having this inherently masculine aspect to it. But having said that, I think that reflective and aware filmmakers and viewers, for that matter, can play around with that inflection. And one thing that's common throughout Cameron's work is he is a very meta cinematic filmmaker who draws attention to the gaze. And I think across his cinema, we've got some great examples of the male gaze being problematized and destabilized. Now, Avatar, of course, emphasizes this throughout with a centrality of I see you. Oh, there should be a song about that. And in their first exchange between Jake and Neytiri does say, "No one can help you to see." But as we see, we've got the film as a whole is trying to help us to see. Now, there's one analysis of Avatar by the film philosopher Rupert Reed, who I've worked with, and he argues that the film is doing a form of reverse anthropology. So, if Grace is the avatar of Cameron, then Jake is very much the avatar of the audience. We who need to learn to see with new eyes, form new connections, see each other afresh, and gain a new appreciation of cinema and, more importantly, the natural environment. So throughout the film, we see from many perspectives, and I think the gaze is used to express various topics. When I mentioned, one of my favorite scenes when Jake first wakes up and sees the world anew from his avatar body, when Neytiri sees Jake from her branches above, and of course when she sees him in his helpless form at the end. But another really interesting point is when our villain, Colonel Quaritch, when he dies, we see Neytiri's arrow from his point of view. We're getting the experience of being shot. And what Rupert talks about in his analysis is this is a sense of it's killing our own inner, big scare quotes here, it's killing our own inner American, inner capitalist, inner exploiter. By giving us a POV at that moment, we are getting that experience. And I think there's this the final shot, which I mentioned earlier, is quite amazing because we move from this separate shot that travels through the Navi, all singing around the Tree of Souls, and then we see Natiri, but then as she sort of moves around, we kind of seem to move into her point of view as Jake opens his eyes to look at her, look at us. So the audience has kind of been incorporated into the female gaze, I think, in that moment. And maybe that's a demonstration of the mutability and the unstable nature of the cinematic gaze. That on the one hand, we can see it go from sort of the separate objective shot into the subjective view, which can be female just as much as it can be male.
You know what? Had me a little scared when you said you hadn't heard of the James Cameron stand-in thing. But now that you've said that, and with everything you've just mentioned about how um, Jake Sully is our avatar, it makes sense, and I agree. I think it is such an interesting way to look at the film in the way that James Cameron is bringing you into that world and having you explore it the same way Jake Sully does. And yeah, it is all about the gaze and how that is viewed and how we view the world through his eyes.
Yeah. And this is something that has come up repeatedly in Cameron's oeuvre. In the Terminator, we get multiple instances where we see the Terminator's vision, sometimes framing Sarah as its target. We also see the Terminator from her perspective plenty of times. And in an article that I wrote about um, female identity and talking about the technology as well in the films of James Cameron, I discuss in detail in the climactic chase of the Terminator, after the Terminator has got its legs blown off and it's crawling after Sarah, and she's crawling through the machinery of the factory. There's an interesting series of um, camera shots where the gaze is quite closely aligned with Sarah. So she'll look behind her, we get her POV. We cut back, we generally tend to see the Terminator itself rather than seeing its point of view. And then our gaze is very closely aligned with Sarah as she crushes it in the hydraulic press. Spoilers, but I'm sure everyone listening has seen the Terminator. Similarly, in Aliens, the Marines wear head cameras, and there are points when Ripley gives them direction. And a key part of Ripley's defeat of the alien queen is holding her gaze. When Ripley, rescues Newt, and they stumble into the nest, and there's the queen laying the eggs. We can't actually see if the aliens even have eyes, but I think Ripley is certainly, in effect, holding the gaze of the alien queen. And then again, back on the ship at the end when they've escaped from the explosion, the queen's about to go after Newt, and Ripley's all like, "No, here, look at me, look at me." Um, in that respect. Now, this is what I mean when I talk about Cameron having a recurring interest in the meta cinematic. In True Lies, it gets quite problematic because the character of Helen is repeatedly subjugated and humiliated by the visual technology of her husband, Harry, especially in the striptease dance sequence, which is quite funny. But the biggest laugh of that sequence, I think, comes right at the end when Harry gets a phone in the face. So he's effectively been manipulating and abusing his wife, and he gets clobbered, which frankly he deserves, as indeed any abusive husband deserves. So it's an interesting point here that the male gaze may appear to be in control, but there are consequences, shall we say. And then we have the famous portrait scene in Titanic. Now, this may sound radical. I don't see the portrait scene in Titanic as a display of the female body, even though on the surface it is. But I think it's fair to say that film is rarely about what's on the surface, right? So
I think that's pretty pretty clear to see.
good, good. Okay. So within the narrative of Titanic, Rose commissions this picture for herself. She's saying, I want you to draw me. And yes, fine. Jack is seeing her, and she does leave the drawing in the safe for her fiance Cal, but she does so as an act of defiance. Now, I'm sure some people are going to point out, oh, but the hands that we see drawing Rose are those of Cameron himself. So is this a dirty old man drawing a younger woman in the nude? Possibly. However, if we're going to talk about that scene as being purely that, then I think we have to consider any and every instance of nudity in every film ever to be effectively the filmmaker's wank fantasy. And if it is, well, where do we go with that? That's a bit of a reductive reading, I think. So I think that the portrait that we see, the portrait scene, it is a scene of imaging and of reflecting and of re-imaging. And interestingly, it's kind of echoes an earlier scene in Titanic when, after Bill Paxton, Brock's character, and the other salvage workers have found the painting in the safe, we see the painting, the drawing itself. There's an image, and we see a camera on that. It's being imaged, and then there's a screen up to the side, an image of that image, and of course we're seeing, therefore, on our own screen, the image of an image of an image. So there's all of these re-images and reframings of the images. And it's also important to note that the focus of this sequence isn't Rose's body. Do we see Kate Winslet naked? Yes, very nice. Have a good time with that, people. But her body is not the focus of the sequence. What is the focus are the hands creating the image, but more importantly, Rose's eye. And the scene ends with this close up on Rose's eye that then morphs into the eye of old Rose. We transition from the eye of Kate Winslet to that of Gloria Stewart. And I think that it is a scene about seeing and about being seen rather than and about destabilizing and problematizing the eye, as it were. And it's worth noting that the end of Titanic has a similar moment to the end of Avatar, because we see Rose dreaming, and then the camera moves down through the ocean to the wreck of the ship. And, within Rose's dream, we see Titanic being transitioned, restored to her glory. And this is all through Rose's POV, and the camera follow, and we go along the deck of the ship into um, the kind of ball area, and we see her hand. So she's opening this, and she walks up the stairs, and then the camera sort of moves out to include her as well. So in the same way, in the reverse of what we see in Avatar, where the camera moves into Neytiri's POV, here we have the camera moving out of Rose's POV to encompass everyone, because quite like Avatar, the finale, the final image of Titanic is one of connection, of people together. Yes, we have our young lovers kiss, but they're surrounded by all of the nice people from the from the Titanic, and then we have this connection in there as well. And all of this is through showing the view of cinema, the view of Cameron cinema, but I think of cinema more broadly. It can express connection, and it is not something fixed. It is not something stable. It is something that filmmakers can play around with. It is something that we as viewers can interpret and reinterpret. And ultimately, it is so perfect at expressing connection and togetherness.
Yeah, I think you've really nailed it in terms of that connection. Well, between Titanic and Avatar is a great point. That they are ending in a very similar moment. In that is that connection between our two characters, and they are surrounded by the people that matter most in that moment, in a way. And I think that's such a beautiful way to look at it and see how Cameron views those moments as well. He sees that as an important moment to end on, and I think that's what he wants people to take away when they leave his films. That there is a connection to be made with other people, and it's a shared experience, and I think that speaks to his wider philosophies of film, in that his films are for that wider audience to enjoy and to get those messages of connection, and his other messages of environmentalism and those ideas out there to the audience, and to spark a discussion and create those connections.
And I think it's notable that Avatar speaks to that collective experience of film viewing, and clearly did communicate that and was embraced in that way by audiences. Because while, okay, we can say yes, was Avatar the is Avatar the highest grossing film of all time? Yes, but not if we account for inflation. However, what is worth noting is that for the first 3 months of 2010, in the 3 months after Avatar's initial release, 10% of all cinema tickets sold were for Avatar. So that's I think, a more representative illustration of the popularity of the cinematic experience at a time perhaps when cinema audiences were cinema viewing figures were not doing so well. Avatar was a demonstration of what cinema uniquely could do. Now, of course, it's going to be really interesting in late 2022 when The Way of Water comes out. Quite, a good stretch of time has passed now since cinemas reopened, because we had a long stretch of time where cinemas, we couldn't go there, and many people still don't feel safe going to the cinema. Now, that hasn't stopped plenty of films from being big successes and producing some remarkable collective experiences. I don't know if you saw Spider Man No Way Home with a big audience.
I was away when it first released. I saw it like the week after, so my
Uh,
shared experience wasn't quite the same as I've seen from some of the clips online.
Okay, yeah, well, I did see it on its opening night, and I never have I been in a cinema that had so much applause, which I took during the film, which I confess I took part in. I was like, wait, people are cheering and clapping. Me too, me too. This is great. Um, but yeah, it will be interesting to see if The Way of Water is able to get the kind of audiences, on the one hand, that will probably be needed for us to get more sequels, because we want more sequels, but also, I think, um, to get the kind of audiences who can then share in that collective experience and get the same sort of special aspect of being able to see, and of course also to hear, because I think another crucial aspect of the way Cameron's films treat gender is through their use of voice. Now, it's worth noting that Avatar is Cameron's first film with a male voiceover, because we've got female narrators in Terminator 2 and Titanic. But of course, Avatar is narrated by Jake. We see his video log throughout, and then his audio proceeds over much of the film. But of course, I think that's crucial because that's part of the film's reverse anthropology. Any decent anthropologist would be doing that, will be documenting what they do. And as our avatar, we're going in as well. And it's important that we learn what's going on, that we are going to be able to recount our experiences, both from an individual and a collective perspective. And crucially, it's not just about, I think, learning to see, but we must also learn to listen, learn to hear, because the voice in Avatar, although on the one hand it's Jake, through that Avatar, we're also getting the voice of Awa, or if you like, if you want to link this back to kind of ideas of Earth Spirit, the voice of Gaia. And what this serves, what the female voice serves to be, I think, is an important attachment to heritage and memory. we see, as you mentioned, Natiri's mother, Moat. She is the spiritual leader who interprets the will of Awa. So hers is a voice that we need to listen to. And Jake learns the stories of Na'vi history from Natiri. And I think and then of course the character of Grace as well. She's a kind of a voice of wisdom and reason. And then when Jake kind of connects with Awa through the Tree of Souls, he's trying to form this attachment to heritage, to oral history and memory. Um, so it's important, I think, that is what the female voice kind of here represents, this connection to history, because how much of um, of the male voice, which of course I'm so aware that hello people, listen to this male voice right now, or don't, but make sure you listen to female voices too. Um, so much of the male voice is about insisting upon its own importance and erasing certain aspects of history and heritage, and maybe there's more to be obtained from listening to the word, to the words of mother, to the words of women, to the words of water and the way of water. Okay, I'm reaching now. But I think what we can see is this attachment to the past and to memory. And even if we don't directly hear the voice of Awa, it's fair to say I think that runs through everything and what we can gain from um, Avatar experienced collectively is to hear this new appreciation and listen more closely, as well as gaining new ways to see.
That is fantastically put. What a
Oh,
beautiful way
good. I
to.
was making that up as I went along.
Oh, it came out perfectly, so don't you worry. And I feel like that is almost like a perfect way to sort of wrap up in terms of saying what Cameron has as a philosophy is that he wants people to see, he wants people to listen, and it is about understanding. It's not just about, well, it's funny that I'm doing a whole podcast about this and talking, but it is for me, this is a podcast where I am listening. I'm listening to people's ideas. They are coming here to share those experiences with me, and I hope that comes across, and it doesn't seem like a very how should I put it, a way of me just to talk forever about Avatar, as much as I would love to.
Well, no,
I
I
love
mean
hearing
you're
like
let
other people's experiences.
exactly. You've let me come on here and talk and talk and talk about Avatar, which I knew I would. Um, so apologies if anyone's got fed up of hearing my voice, but if you have, you've probably switched off by now. But maybe you'll come back another time. But yeah,
What?
I think that getting podcasting is kind of an interesting comparison in this respect because podcasting is about bringing people together to listen, and I think some podcasts have been able to build up really nice communities. So I hope that the Avatar fans out there can maybe will find these conversations interesting and will maybe want to join in more conversations about this both now and as the way of water arrives.
Yeah, and I think that was the main idea of me bringing out this podcast is that I want to unite a group of fans in a way that I haven't seen, and I wasn't part of it in that time period when Avatar first came out, and I look forward to hopefully meeting more people who have different experiences, bring new ideas, and have different understandings of Avatar, Cameron, Pandora, the wider ideas of cinema and the world. And I really appreciate people like yourself coming on and bringing those wonderful ideas to me and basically let me absorb it all. And I hope by the time Way of Water comes out, I am a just a treasure chest of knowledge when it comes to Avatar.
That sounds like a very healthy ambition.
So I think we shall wrap it up for us there. But I know that in the future, I hope to have you back on because we have a few other ideas that I know we want to have a little discussion about.
This is
So
true.
I imagine sometime in the future I'll have you back on and we can delve deep again into Avatar and hopefully learn some other new things, which I'm very excited to learn about.
Me too.
So, would you like to let the people know where they can find you?
Certainly. Well, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram and Letterboxd. I am at Dr. Gaine. That's DRGAINE. Through Twitter, I also post links to the reviews I write for The Geek Show and the Critical Movie Critics. And if you fancy listening to some more podcast goodies, then please listen to my podcast, Invasion of the Poddy People, along with my lovely co hosts, James and Russell. You can find us on all good podcast providers where we talk about all forms of genre cinema.
And I'm sure you may have already realized, but I'm going to ask you a very simple question: Is would you be able to invite me to the Avatar Way of Water premiere if you by any chance get there yourself, and I could be your plus one?
Should I be fortunate enough to get such a ticket, then it would be my pleasure to have you along, Shaun.
Thank you very much. I'm asking every single guest, so eventually it will work.
Some
So
point, you'll ask the right person.
you never know. You never know. If I get James
Absolutely.
Cameron on, I definitely get in. I feel like.
Yeah, yeah. Well, keep on trying. Make sure you tweet at him and contact his agent thoroughly.
So that will be it for me as well. You can find me at Avatar Pod on Twitter. And yeah, thank you very much for joining us today on our journey through Avatar and the world of Pandora and beyond. Goodbye.